Hey y'all, Casey and Brandon here, and we've been reading more comics.
Oh, hey, I didn't see that.
What a cute smile.
A nice young lady. We read a bunch of comics, and we were going to talk about our comics. Would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I could. Well, no, I want you to go first because you have the thing on top that, like, maybe I'm most excited about. It's so good. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I guess we didn't talk about this last week. So Casey's been on a kick of reading, like, essentially we got into Warrior Nun comics because the Warrior Nun TV show and because Antarctic Press stuff is always very exciting to us. And Chuck Dixon's a writer who I've been kind of dipping my toes in his work, kind of explore stuff because I really admire how his output is really impressive and it all seems really solid, everything I've read.
Yeah.
And this is the first series of his that I've really, I think he wrote Winterworld, which I really liked. With Jorge Safino. It's like a post-apocalypse.
Safino's so good. I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, I should read that.
Oh, that's great.
Cool.
I have a copy. But this one is fantastic, and this is essentially a nun in the far future, and like Earth has multiple colonies, and they have a giant spaceship called Pittsburgh, and it's about this nun that is being sent around doing all these missions.
Isn't it like it's like City of Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
Or something. Like, it's like the full long title. It was kind of funny to
Yeah, it's like we're docking in the city of Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And I was reading a little bit about this. I'll have to open this up. So Chuck Dixon created it with his wife at the time.
Oh.
There's a very ominous, all the Wikipedias say his wife at the time. So apparently they dated, they were married for a while. And her name is Judith Hunt. And Judith Hunt also did this. I have this weird 2-issue Robotech series for DC Comics that has nothing to do with the Robotech cartoon.
Interesting.
They basically they had the license for basically a bunch of model kits of robots from Japan, and they were calling that Robotech as well. And so they made their own 2-issue series at DC,
Interesting.
which is really fun. And it feels very like Omega Men, weird DC 80s science fiction. But
I love it when, like, comic things will, or like any media, it's like we have these few things and we're gonna cobble it together and call it this thing, and now it's a new universe or something. Like Zentai stuff did that a lot.
Oh, certainly.
But like that's a really cool other example.
Yeah, that's one, and I have those Robotech books, so I'm interested in. It's funny, I posted on Instagram and somebody wrote me and they were like, so it has the Invid in it? And I was like, no, there's no Invid. And they're like, the Zentradi. And I was like, there's nothing from Robotech in it. It has robots. You get robots. But these are really fun, and having a nun character, like you were much more enamored initially. Like when I was growing up, or as a teenager, Warrior Nun Arila was coming out from Antarctic, and I always regarded it as like
the
I was
best thing. Your favorite comic.
Is like, oh, this company that I like everything by is doing something I suddenly don't care about. I did not have a big connection to Catholicism, and so this is like. Which is a really good job of having a nun character that's really interesting and cool.
Yeah.
And
she's like a cool lady who does action stuff and takes out the bad guys.
Yeah, exactly. And
there's dinosaurs.
Yeah, they go on an alien planet with dinosaurs. And so Judith Hunt doesn't stay on the series for the entirety of it, but the artist, like this one's by Kara Sherman and inks by Ricardo Villagrán, and they do a good job of kind of carrying on the series. It doesn't feel like an abrupt artistic shift. This issue, I just kind of jumped issues because we have a bunch of random ones. Issue 5 here is set in like a giant skyscraper that she's doing kind of a secret mission in. And her downstairs neighbor falls in love with her, and you get to kind of see his version of her and her version. And there's this great page where she's getting ready, and she's loading her guns, and she's praying and sleeping with the Bible, and he's getting ready, and he's like having a snack, and he's reading "Sluts in Space" by L. Ron Hubbard for some reason, and then he like is lying in bed too, and it's just like this very contrast with this space nun woman and this just dude downstairs, and it's even the panel setup is very similar. So yeah, Evangeline, very good, very fun, surprise. Like this for a while. I was reading, what what was that? I was reading this kind of 80s assassin comics, Sable, John Sable.
Oh yeah.
And I was enjoying John Sable because they felt pulpy, but like it felt like the comic version of Miami Vice to me. And reading these, I feel like it's one of those things where I'm like, this is what I was looking for, John Sable. Like, these are just much better comics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, very exciting. Highly recommended.
And just really quick, so these ones are both from First Comics, right?
Mhm.
And so I think maybe in a earlier video, so we first got Evangeline when we were living in Portland.
Okay.
But it was a one-off issue that we found, and I don't even think we ever thought we'd find anymore. But it was from the original run, which was with Comico,
yeah.
Yeah, and so I think in one of those old videos we might talk about that issue. So it was doubly cool to like find, a bunch more, because we found like a treasure trove of them at a couple places around town.
Yeah. And it's a weird book too, because it's not something that I ever run into before this year. Unless my memory's gone.
Aside from
the
other one.
Yeah, so my memory is Swiss cheese, is my point. Yeah, and a weird side note, Comico also had the license all the Robotech comics, but did the actual licensed Robotech on like the DC one.
Oh, right on.
So, your turn, young lady.
Well, first I just remembered, speaking of comic books, stores around town, I was gifted this really cool shirt from Ralph at my favorite comic book store in town. Alternate Reality Comics. He gave this to me for my birthday, which was super sweet. There it is, Alternate Reality Comics. These are his characters, and it says Plur, which I like a lot. Peace, love, unity, respect. I used to be a raver kid. So
that's like a rave thing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We'd get we'd make the little candy bracelets, or we call them candy. They're just made of plastic with little the letters and stuff.
I was gonna ask if people eat the candy bracelets, but then I was like,
I bet the name originated from people getting actual candy bracelets, because when you're at a rave and in altered states of consciousness, you want things for your mouth, like whether it's like a sucker or like a ring pop or binky.
You explained everything to me.
And
the guy from Jamiroquai is there every time.
I wish. He's so fun.
Oh, I should also mention that we found the Evangeline comics for like much more expensive, like kind of more than cover price at another store, and we were like kind of testing the waters and getting them, and then we went into Alternate Reality and they had them all in the 50-cent bin.
Yeah, they're so cool. They get so much cool stuff, and they're just really Pierce and Ralph are just really cool people. So, anyways, thank you to y'all if you watch this. But regardless, if y'all ever end up in Las Vegas, pay them a visit. They're awesome. They have an awesome store. Okay, now on to comics again. So, in an interesting just accident, I happened to get 2 Aftershock books recently.
Okay.
And these are, I didn't get them thinking I'm going to get 2 Aftershock books and check them out. I just happened to get them. I think I got this one which is Shipwreck by Warren Ellis and Phil Hester, just because I was being an edgy teen, getting a Warren Ellis book. And then the other one is, this is Dark Red in my left hand, by Tim Seeley and Corinne Howell. And so yeah, I wanted to get this one because it was dark zombie stuff, or vampires actually.
We also generally really like Tim Seeley books.
Yeah, that's true. I really like Tim Seeley books. That's true. I love Hack Slash, and most things that I read that he does, I enjoy. Probably comes from the fact that I really like horror things and pulpy things and boobies and stuff like that.
I feel like there's that thing where it's like sometimes you're using the same currency as someone almost.
Yeah.
And you start with their stuff and you're like, oh, this guy gets it.
Totally. But anyways, through my Felix Culpa of getting these 2 books, I was able to compare 2 Aftershock books. And because Aftershock to me is not a publisher that I have a ton of faith in, it would have to be, if I saw an issue in previews and it was from Aftershock, it would have to be really good for me to give it a shot.
I feel like we've been talking about that a lot lately, the idea of how much a publisher's stamp on something adds weight or detracts weight from a book. And Aftershock, in my mind, it's I feel like they have good production value on their books, but I can't tell you an Aftershock book that I'm like, that's the publisher that did this.
Same. I don't know. Maybe there is some other Aftershock book that I really like. Hint. One of these I like a lot. But I can't think of it if there's one. But anyways, I'm glad I gave these a shot to this little experiment. Shipwreck, I didn't super care for. It was fine. The art's good. I like the art. I didn't really understand what was happening. It was like some vaguely supernatural happenings. But another weird thing, like, so you get this far in the book, and then all of the rest of this is all back matter and ads, which seemed like a lot.
Interesting. And this is issue 1?
Yeah, it's issue 1, yeah. So it's called Shipwreck. I don't know, maybe it gets better or something. But I just happened to get it from a 50-cent bin, and it didn't trip my trigger. So it goes. On the other hand, Dark Red, again by Tim Seeley and Corinne Howell, really fun, really good, really cool premise. You know, I'm a bit biased, I suppose, because as you said, Brandon, I tend to like Tim Seeley stuff anyways. But essentially, the premise is that this guy on the cover, his name's Chip, he is like a gas station employee in a small town in North Dakota, and he works the night shift because he is a vampire, and so they reveal that gradually via the fact that like he is asked to stay a little bit late on his shift, and it's night shift, so it's ending as the sun is coming up, and so he has to race home, and he starts to like catch fire as he's like running into his house, and then he like gets into like a compartment that's underneath his floor, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. So like vampire in a small town, interesting, cool idea. So like I was already intrigued with that, but then the twist, or I guess twist to me anyways, was that he has a friend who comes over, and she's this cool lady, and she really wants to get out of this small town. She's like, yeah, turn me into a vampire and let's go to the big city. And he's like all about it until she says, let's go to the big city. And then he's like immediately like, no, big cities are terrible. Real America is only in the small towns. People in the big city are like, they're bad. They don't know what it's like to grab hold of something and take it and make it your own. And so this girl, this friend of his that he's talking to, is a Native American, and so she's like, excuse me, take it and make it your own? And he's like, grr, it's not what I meant. And meanwhile he's watching a John Wayne movie, and so like she leaves, and then he's like, you get it, Duke, you remember when guys like us used to be the good guys. And that's such like a twist on vampire stuff. Like I've never run into that. And it gives further light to the title of the book, which is Dark Red. So it's red blood, but also red conservative. And then some other like vampires are there and stuff, and other things happen. But yeah, I don't know. Really interesting, a fresh take as far as I'm concerned. And I'm gonna go out of my way to find this book because I think it's worth plenty more than 50 cents.
You know, they're both colored by the same guy as well, which is interesting.
Oh, cool. I mean, I think the art's great on both of them, and the coloring is
Mark Englert.
Okay. But yeah, anyways, that's Dark Red. I enjoyed it a lot, and I recommend it. If you like horror things, I guess.
Cool, and I wonder if it gives you more of a rounded idea of what Aftershock books could be.
Yeah, certainly. Like, I mean, this opens my mind to giving Aftershock more of a chance. All right. What you got next?
Let's see. Oh, so next I was going to talk about two things at once. I've been doing a thing. This also just happened by accident. Mm-hmm. I picked up this issue of DC Focus, which is just like a free 50 cent. It says free 50 cent on the cover. Giveaway thing to promote DC Comics.
Okay.
And I had this when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
And it talks about this this Del Close John Ostrander Wasteland comic, which it has this weird pickle thing in it, which is a drug that it's called fugu, and it's a drug that gives you the most incredible high, but then you die.
Do you know what fugu is Japanese for?
No.
A pufferfish, which
Oh.
which kills you unless you are very careful as you cut it into sushi.
Okay, I've heard of that. So yeah, it's interesting. I
Yeah.
wonder how much of that was purposeful and how much that is just slightly changing it. I mean, obviously it's purposeful, but so I read the preview promoting it, and then the comic, and the comic was funny because I'd actually read it before and I just forgot.
Oh.
And that's basically like the story I told you about the drug that is great, and like basically it's a bunch of cops that come in and a bunch of people are sitting around a table and they're like, why would they take this drug that would kill you immediately just for an ultimate high? And the detectives are left alone, and one of the detectives like picks it up and it's like, and so it's almost, I've been reading a couple short stories, and it's like I feel like that's not even a story, it's just like a setup. But I enjoyed the hype of reading the Focus thing, and then I also read this Amazing Heroes issue with a thing on Gray Morrow's Edge of Chaos, and I haven't read Edge of Chaos yet, but reading the preview thing, interview promoting it, made me very excited about it. And it's set in Atlantis, and it's about a guy who's, this kind of Atlantean god guy, and his two sidekicks are a monkey who's been augmented to be as intelligent as a human, and the missing link, essentially, so like a Neanderthal man. And it's like this guy hanging out with these two monkey sidekicks in Atlantis, and it just sounds really fun. And Gray Morrow's a guy I discovered very, very recently. I read his Lois Lane comics, and since then I've just been running into his stuff everywhere. He worked with John Arcudi.
Yes, I remember you saying that, yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited. I'll probably talk about Edge of Chaos next time. I found 2 issues.
Yeah.
And the pages are they're exceptionally beautiful.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so I suspect I will like it. And I'm always really excited when you like an artist's work. Something we were talking about recently is like, we got that Catwoman series from Cliff Chang, and him writing his own work was the first time I really connected with it. And so my hope is that, because I've like Gray Morrow stuff a lot, that him writing his own work I'll connect with even more.
That makes sense. Before we get away from that though, that's set in, where is that set in?
Atlantis?
Yes. What did we learn potentially about Atlantis recently?
Oh yeah, there was a documentary, I think it was a Joe Rogan interview that kind of led me to the documentary thing.
But I just watched the
Sure.
other video.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was but that's fine.
Yeah. So there's a really interesting YouTube series that I can't remember the name of, where there's guys talking about them finding where they believe Atlantis was, and it being was the Eye in the Sahara?
The Eye of the Sahara. It's in, I think, Mauritania or Mauritius in Africa. And it was a very compelling explanation, I thought. Didn't you think?
Yeah, it was really fascinating. And it said and the video talks a lot about stuff that I did not know about Atlantis.
Yeah, same.
About it having elephants and it having walls of gold and all these things.
And these big concentric circles that you can very clearly see from, satellite.
Yeah, that's
From
what
space.
they said. And that was one of the things that astronauts look at from space.
Yeah.
So that definitely sparked my. So I wonder how much this Gray Morrow's version of Atlantis is tied in with the, and like I wasn't aware that Troy was found. Recently, Troy was thought to be fictional, and then they actually found the city.
Yeah.
And so the idea of Atlantis being a real place that we can actually find is really exciting.
Totally. That would be so cool. Cool. Well, my next thing was a Dark Horse Presents, and the covers were, so this is Nocturnals on this cover, and then on this other side, you flip it over, it's Metelfer.
Metelfer.
Is that what it is? Metelfer?
Metalfer. I don't know.
Oh, I thought maybe you know the things, so I thought maybe it was something you knew. I don't know. I think I missed the boat on Dark Horse Presents. I have had so many people who are like a bit older than me try to convince me time and again that Dark Horse Presents was like exceptional, and maybe it was for some comic readers, but to me it just feels like you just get these tiny snippets and you get left unsatisfied, especially if you're just getting like, you know, sort of random issues. I was subscribed to it at one point even, and I was like,
Interesting.
I still didn't get much out of it, but it sounds like you have something to say about it.
Oh, sure, yeah, I have a lot to say about it. First of all, Dark Horse Presents is a really uneven thing. Like, they've had amazing things in there, like Paul Pope's One Trick Ripoff ran in there.
Oh, wow.
The first Sin City ran in there.
Dang.
They've
huge.
had a huge amount of exceptional comics run in it, but they do have, like, I've done work for Dark Horse Presents. I did a story called The Speaker in there. And then afterwards, the thing that eventually became my Rain Like Hammers, I initially wanted to do as a Dark Horse Presents story, but they had I think it was an 8-page limit. And I was like, I'm not. It's funny. The thing that they were like, we'll give you 8 pages. When Left to My Own Devices became the 48-page first issue of Rain Like Hammers, so I definitely needed more than 8 pages. But
Sure.
yeah, it's weird. Yeah, because there is a lot of good stuff in it, but it's very much a specific thing. Like this, I noticed has Andy Watson's Skeleton Key, which I really enjoy.
Oh.
But yeah, a lot of the stuff is not really. I like Nocturnals. I remember enjoying it, and you were saying when we were flipping this earlier that you felt like it would work much better in color.
Yeah, and so and it's not just like I'm feeling that just on a whim. After this, I looked it up. I looked up like, oh, is this in color somewhere? And luckily, it is. So I can go out and find it because I think the art looks really good. I think it falls a little flat because it's not in color, and I'm not against black and white comics. I think they can really shine, but I think they shine best when they're really crisp and sort of minimalist almost.
Well, this looks painted, and it's weird to see a grayscale painted comic.
Exactly.
And the artist Dan Brereton, he has such this, like, his style is these very intense Angelina Jolie eyebrows on everyone.
Oh.
And I wonder.
Intense colors. But...
Well, their eyebrows always stood out to me. He's someone who I'd be interested in looking up a photo of if he had severe eyebrows like that.
But yeah, I mean, the coloring on the cover is pretty much what the normal comic looks like, and I think it's really cool, like really bright, vibrant.
I remember
colors.
he would do DC work sometimes, and his characters would all have the look of his.
Interesting. I think it's a really cool look. I haven't seen him do stuff before, and I hadn't read Nocturnals before. So the positive of this is that I would like to look for some Nocturnals. They have one other thing in here that was kind of fun to read, was Starship Troopers. There's a little Starship Troopers story in there, and it's not great, but it was pretty fun for me because I had just watched that movie, actually. So.
Oh yeah, I think we talked about that briefly last time. Interestingly enough, the Starship Troopers comic here was written by Jan Strand, who did all the Dennis Fujitake Dalgota stuff I was talking about recently, and the Retief comics that I like a lot. And it was illustrated by Tommy Lee Edwards, who's a really nice guy, and lettered by John Workman.
Oh, wow, that's
John Workman is a fantastic cartoonist, and lettered my friend Joe's Shutter comic.
Yeah, that's what it was. I knew.
So that's exciting.
Yeah, I don't know. Dark Horse Presents is, I guess, like you said, very uneven, but cool stuff.
It has a tendency, and something that's very frustrating in modern comics is there's really not a place for short stories unless you're publishing like a one-time anthology. But there's no place that's a marker, like we were talking with publishers, no place that's a mark of like, this is where good short stories exist.
Yeah. I saw it when we were at Alternate Reality this last time. I almost got it. Something I hadn't heard of before. They were billing it as comic book essays.
Oh.
So they were like, they're short stories effectively with like one purpose in mind. And I like that as a format. It was a collection of one person's comic book essays. But that could be an interesting thing if someone like, I don't know, started doing that.
Yeah, I like the idea of a comic book essay if it was released by one, because it is difficult. I always find themed anthologies to be very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because people, you know, I feel like oftentimes people will just be like, oh yeah, here's my version of that I've thought for 2 seconds on.
Yeah. Well, but the thing I gathered from this one I'm talking about is that it was like, it wasn't like that. I'll take it. It was more like if you had something to say, then you say it.
Yeah, and that's what makes it more exciting about being from one person, because
Oh, yeah.
one person writing their own comic book essays, I think, is very different than being like, here's something you should write about. And you're like, I haven't thought about it, but okay.
True. Yeah. What else? What else you got?
Oh, we mentioned Cliff Chang earlier, and I picked up a couple issues of his Creeper series. That was...
That's older Cliff Chang too.
Yeah, it has a Matrix. It has a Matrix anime ad in it, just to let you know when it came out. 2003. So this is Jason Hall writing, and then Cliff Chang and Dave Stewart on colors, with John Workman on lettering again.
Oh, nice. So
Yeah.
real Workman.
Yeah, it's interesting, because something I was saying before we started recording is Cliff Chang work I only started really appreciating. Maybe I said this while we were recording. I only really appreciated his work when I read his own writing, because I don't think he's worked with a writer that I like as much as his.
Mm-hmm.
And this is fine. It's set in 1920s Paris and has like kind of all of the kind of Hemingway expatriate characters in it, and there's been so many movies and TV shows that have that group in it, and it almost just feels like they want to have a fun party and be like, wouldn't it be cool to meet Hemingway and Gertrude Stein, all these people? But I don't past like nostalgia fan fiction. And it's like, I'm a big Hemingway guy too, so him showing up in this, I'm like, oh, that's cool. But I think the only version of a Hemingway showing up in a comic or a film that I've really enjoyed is the Jason comic.
Oh, yeah.
It's the one where they do a bunch of 1920s expat writers that are all drawn as dog characters do a bank heist together.
He uses them in several books, but
Yes.
yeah.
But yeah, that one specifically. So this, I'll read more issues of this. This is weird. It is issue 2, and it's also made the Creeper a sexy lady.
That sounds fun.
So I enjoyed it, but I almost would enjoy it more if it wasn't set in retread ground. And Cliff Chang's cartooning is always very competent and good to read.
Yeah, he's a good artist. Well, next in my stack is Darkchild. Picked up these Darkchild issues.
Those look good.
One was from Darkchild Entertainment, and the other is Maximum Press.
Uh-huh.
And
Which I believe is Liefeld's. One of Liefeld's.
oh, Maximum?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Didn't know that.
All the maximums and extremes of the world.
That makes sense. Well, I had been having a lot of fun with, I learned that they're called Bad Girl comics, which are like these like sexy, badass ladies, and a lot of them happened to be nuns that I liked, but I also liked a couple others that I can't remember right now. They were probably from like Boundless and stuff like that. So I was like, oh yeah, like this looks cool, especially like Darkchild. Like I love Magic's Darkchild from like, Marvel stuff. I knew this wasn't the same thing, but like it looks similar. Like she's a pretty blonde girl, demon stuff. So like, all right, I'll give this a try. Sure. My bad, my mistake.
Yeah, apology accepted.
Yeah. So the creator's name is Randy Queen. The artists are Ron Adrian on pencils and quote The Cleaner and Sarah Oates on inks. I don't know what that means, but sure. And a lot of it is just these like full page panels with just a wall of text. Like a surprising number of pages are that way.
I kind of feel like being like, hey, welcome to the 90s.
Yeah. But that sucks. And then there's like a centerfold in it. Like
It's covered in spiders.
covered in spiders. That's
Sure.
everyone's favorite. Oh wow, that's how they covered up.
You're talking about Darkchild's nipples being covered up in spiders, and I was gonna say that is a great contender for Jim Ballant, who was famous for doing like a sexy 90s Catwoman. He later on did a comic called Tarot where he covered up a girl's nipples with blood. And I think spiders might be worse.
Yeah, I feel like spiders are worse.
Nice. Good work, Darkchild. It's interesting, the 90s has such a resurgence of people being like remember when comics were fun? But and I've come to grips with the 90s having some really fantastic work, and like I was really enjoying like Poison Elves and like Gold Digger and Twilight X and all these cool things that were going on in the 90s. But when I think of the 90s, this is kind of what is in my brain of like, oh yeah, those things, that's what was going on in comics. So
Yeah, these are like the type of comics where because when I was really small, I would get comics when I could. It was very difficult for me. Like I wasn't near comic stores or anything like that.
because the war.
But like at like the spinner rack at like 7-Eleven, I would pick up what I could or whatever. And then I would see stuff like this, and it was just like, oh, comics are stupid. Okay, I understand. And then I stopped reading comics. Like this kind of, honestly, like 90s comics, and like are what pushed me out of comics. Like 90s and early 2000s comics are what pushed me out of comics. Like quintessential ones like this.
Sure.
And so yeah, when I hear people be like, "Oh, I want to bring back the '90s comics. Like they are great, Image so good." Like I don't need you to comment on that. I don't need to get you in trouble. But like I've looked at '90s Image comics. Okay, no. No.
Alan Moore did some good stuff.
Sure, maybe, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think that like just like brainless edgelords are interesting or cool. So
now if we're going, I feel like the 70s are kind of like 70s, very early 80s is where my current heart lies in comics.
Interesting. I don't know what. I mean, I like that era, I guess.
Because I used to think the 80s kind of the Jim Shooter Marvel run era stuff, but I feel like the more I revisit that stuff as an adult, the more safe it feels. Where I feel like early 80s, late 70s is similar to that in quality, but weirder and a little riskier.
And I mean, and with all this said too, I'm just thinking, like, well, what is my era? And I do like some comics from the 90s. Like, obviously, that's when I started reading comics. But by the late 90s and then like into the 2000s, I was like, no, this is trash. This is a trash medium. Why does anybody read these? And then I came back to it and what brought me back to it was I was in college and I studied comics in a college class, and it brought back, I saw the value in it again.
Would you remember any specific books that really clicked with you then?
Yes. So I know this is going to hurt you, but Y: The Last Man is actually one of the things that brought me back into comics. I don't like it so much anymore, but to me at that time, it was... I'm dyslexic, so like reading has always been very difficult for me, and comics has been a way that I can read. And so that like got me to read. Now I read like voraciously. I'm constantly reading. But so Y: The Last Man was like, it was like interesting concepts, high concepts, not just like superhero stuff, and like it had like social and like political commentaries that I was like very intrigued by at the time, and it was totally this like fascinating original idea as far as I was concerned, and so like that brought me back in. That one, and then at the time I actually gained a love of superhero comics.
Okay.
Because of Civil War, Marvel Comics Civil War, which was one of the books that we deeply analyzed.
That's so fascinating, because my immediate reaction to both those books is just like I don't know if those would get me to stick around comics, but it's cool that you got that out of them, because I think they're both like they're not like unreadable, horrible comics, but they're also like I remember Civil War coming out and me being like, this is exciting, and then kind of dipping my toes into it, being like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes more sense too, because you were in comics at the time.
Sure.
You were still in comics. For me, that was like, it was a cool idea to be like, oh, all the superheroes that I know and love, or like a bunch of them are like divided, and like what do they do? And like each one of them sort of like represents like different reactions to not only this fictional law in the book, but also just like regulation and like vigilantism and like all these different things.
That is a really cool thing. And also, I haven't read it since it came out, and so I can't comment on it. And literally me reading Y was me being like, oh, I'll try this out. And then being like, the main character is a magician with a monkey? No thanks. So I don't know if you give anything a fair shake, and I've never really connected with Vaughn's writing. So
Yark. Yeah, so it's funny. I adored those for over a decade at least. But now, and then I had like gone back and read them multiple times and decided that I didn't need to hold on to them anymore. They
Okay.
didn't. I've moved beyond them at this point.
I'm surprised it wasn't like Watchmen and Mouse being like the things that are.
My professor, it's funny that you say that, because my professor specifically said he didn't want to cover those because he felt that those were like overly trendy.
Good professor.
Yes. Interesting guy. I got into some serious fights with that dude, but hey, he brought me back to comics.
Because of the war.
That's pretty cool. No, we had very different political opinions. But anyways, yeah, that's my story of
That's
comics
cool to hear.
and coming back to comics and all that stuff. Shout out to Graham Cracker Comics in Illinois, because they were my
You're stealing my name.
dealers. Yeah. This is a fun story. How you got this book?
Yeah, so kind of in relation to alternate reality we were talking about.
Yeah.
I follow Adam Warren's Patreon. I'm a huge Adam Warren fan. I own more of his original art than any other creator probably that I'm not like, close friends with. I
Mhm.
got to work with him once. I love Adam Warren stuff always. And I saw on his Patreon that he put out a recent Marvel book, and we just hadn't been to a comic store in a while.
Sorry, I
Do
was
you
thinking of
know?
my class.
And so I went into alternate reality, and Pierce, who works there, they'd sold out of the Crypt of Shadows that Adam Warren did a short story in.
Mhm.
But Pierce was nice enough, and he was like, "Oh, come back tomorrow. You can borrow my copy." So this is Pierce's copy.
Yeah.
That I wanted to read because Adam Warren did a story about X-23 and Man-Thing in it.
Mhm.
And I didn't read something I think I've talked about before in here. Something really interesting about Marvel in these days is, I hope it's different for other people, but I only hear about Marvel if people are annoyed at them.
Hmm.
And maybe that's not fair, but partially I'm just not interested. So, but this was like, I'm excited about Adam Warren work, so I'll read it. But I haven't read the rest of the stuff in it, and I don't know if I will, because I kind of came for the comic that I was for. And the Adam Warren thing was interesting, because similar to what I was saying about the Fugu story earlier,
Mhm.
this is like a premise more than a story.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because a while back I read Adam Warren, he did a Venom one shot, and it's been a little while, but I remember it essentially being like, what would happen if the symbiote just kept growing and there was all these like, let's play out the symbiote story for 10 or 20,000 years in the future. And this is X-23 shows up to get Man-Thing for some universe some universe fixing adventure they need to go on together, and he releases some kind of pheromone that sets off her berserker rage, so they get into kind of the hero versus hero battle. And it just talks about what happens if it's never broken up, and how essentially it just goes on longer than the planet they're on exists, and they end up in different versions of reality of just continuously fighting. Something interesting that Adam Warren did in this is he has a note that the visual depiction of X-23 is deliberately inaccurate because she had long ago forgotten the concept or purpose of clothing. So that's really interesting, that the idea that the drawings are actually inaccurate. And then it ends just talking about like how after thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, that eventually like the proton decay will stop these characters from fighting. So it's this premise, and it's like it's like 8 pages, and it's just them fighting and then being like, time's changing, they're eating each other while they're fighting, and they will only stop fighting when proton decay happens. So it's fun to see played out, but it kind of not a story.
So yeah, but Man-Thing is like having a moment, as the kids say.
Yeah, I guess because there was that fun Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marvel stuff's funny. It's like I always have
Show.
a general like I don't want it, but then stuff like the Werewolf by Night thing will come by, and I'll kind of forget that it's Marvel and just enjoy it and be like, oh, it's like those 70s comics. So that's cool.
Next up, I think we might have talked about this on here before, so I'll be brief, but So I read issue 1 of Elf Lord. I think maybe you had read it before. Now I read it.
I read a lot of issue 1 of Elf Lord.
Ooh.
No, I don't. I've never read that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mostly know Barry Blair, the creator of. I'm fascinated by his weird career
Mm-hmm.
because he just was, he ran Aircel Comics and just cranked out all these weird comics.
He ran Aircel?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Or at least he was the one that kind of was the tip of the spear for Aircel.
Okay.
And I know he did ElfQuest for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was doing porn comics at NBM, he was also doing porn comics at NBM.
I want to read those.
They're interesting.
I bet. No doubt.
What do you think of Elf Lord?
I really liked Elf Lord. Like, way more than I thought I would, to be honest. The art is...
way more than should be legally
great.
allowed.
Yeah, that's the reality, unfortunately. These... Okay. Yeah, super fun. There's, like, 1 or 2 panels that are these, like, weird information dialogue dumps that take up half a page, but there are only, like, 2 of them, so I was able... So, like, most of the pacing was really good. And I love the character designs. I love these, like, feminine, like, feminine, masculine mixed characters, which is really cool. And yeah, the coloring's beautiful, and the story's, like, not too exciting, to be honest, but, like, it's like a cool little D&D quest, basically.
Oh, here's one of the pages you were talking about, where it's just
Yeah.
half of it is text.
Like, literally, like, you can see, I literally mean it's half of the page.
Another fun thing is the bottom of each page has got this shield with crossed swords page number. I don't think it needs that, but
No.
it's interesting, and it all looks like it's colored with airbrush and watercolor.
Very bright colors.
I think I described Barry Blair's style as the most bisexual art I've ever seen in my
Yes.
life, where he's just clearly, like, drawing these young elf dudes that he's very into, and then a pretty girl will show up and he draws them with the same passion.
Yeah.
It's just like, all right, just horny cranked up to 11.
It's great. Love
Yeah.
it. So, anyways.
Has this great little sculpture on the back
Yeah,
cover.
very weird back cover.
I love a photo back cover.
I think it's cool. I think it's really weird. I think it's cool. But yeah, we have several more Elf Lord comics.
He didn't write this one. It's by Gordon Deary.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought this was, like, his series. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was too. Interesting. And then Gordon Deary did the Dave Cooper backup story too.
That one's really funny. It's like a wizard trying to deal with these, like, goblin spirits. So he, like, calls, like, basically phones a friend, like, but, like, wizard style.
Uh-huh.
And then the friend is like, "Oh, you silly goose! You gotta use this thing to get rid of the goblin spirits." Like, "Oh, I should have known that." Okay.
And he calls him on his little green orb.
Yeah. Smoking.
Can I guess what the storyline is?
Sure.
He calls in creatures to get rid of the goblins, and then he has to call his friend at the end to be like, "How do I get rid of these creatures?"
No, he just
Okay.
he just doesn't know how to get rid of the creatures, and he calls the friend, and the friend's like, "You dummy, they're obviously such and such spirits, so you just throw salt at them or something."
Obviously.
I forget exactly, but
Okay.
it's really like that. Yeah, I don't know. Elf Lord's cool. I like
Cool.
it.
I'll read that one.
Yeah, Aircel. Man, why is it that I like so many of the publishers I like are the ones that don't exist anymore?
Well, I think that there's a very different thing between being a financially viable place and doing cool, weird stuff.
Yeah.
And oftentimes also, if we're looking at comics that were made 40 years ago, and you're like, why isn't this small Canadian publisher still around
Yeah.
that the creators are all dead from?
Yeah.
Why didn't they hire a team of people to continue and pass their legacy?
Sad.
So, just a short thing, because I don't really have too much to say about it. I've been making a point of reading George Harriman's Crazy Cat every day, like just a couple strips, and they're so good. And I have one in the bathroom that I read in the bathtub that are from the 1940s, and then the one that I'm really enjoying is from like 1908, and they're just like these little short stories. They have a Duck Duke shows up, and there's Officer Pup and Crazy Cat, and they're just like, they're so much fun and so dense.
I kind of like because this is one of the comics that stuck up nose Fantagraphics type crowd
Sure.
was super into. So I had written it off because like I think a lot of the comics that they're like, oh my god, like Kathy is high art. I'm like, Kathy's fine, but like
They love
Ack, like,
what's her
come on.
name? Nancy is the one that they love.
Sure,
But it's because
whatever.
there's a whole long. It's boring, but
But that's all to say, I'd written this off because I thought it was just junk like that.
Yeah,
Which
but Herman's
not
actually
even that
good.
it's- Not even that stuff is like bad, but it's just
Sure.
fine. This is really good. Like you've shown me some as you've been reading, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
yeah, and I would say that I put Harriman in the category as Bon Baudet, where he's a rare cartoonist. Where oh yeah, I always compare his work to Bon Baudet because they're two cartoonists whose work I think is really timeless. Like you can read a Bon Baudet comic, I think you read 100 years from now, and it would still feel like it has this. His characters talk in a way that is not so stuck in the time, or it maybe is just so
Out of time.
yeah, out of and George Herman's like has so much fun with his stuff. Kind of in relation to what you're saying about Fantagraphics. Now, I like some of the Fantagraphic stuff, but they do have
Me
that
too.
snob stuff. That,
Yeah, I like
yeah.
a lot of their stuff. I just don't like the attitude of like,
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a bunch of weird stuff. Like, I mean, both Fantagraphics being like world's greatest cartoonist, and you're always like, I mean, you're not publishing Urasawa. Like,
yeah.
you-
They do publish some really good stuff.
Yeah,
I
no.
love Simon Hanselman stuff. Everything he does.
Totally.
They'll put out. I'll be looking through previews and be like, oh my gosh, they have this new collection. So cool. But it's like, don't be such a dick. How about that?
It's funny because in person, I really like Eric Reynolds as a person. the
I would love
publisher.
to meet them.
Yeah, they're lovely, but yeah, there's that kind of attitude around them. Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of the snob stuff of Crazy Cat, I feel like is like the covers of these editions were all done by Chris Ware, and I don't like Chris Ware stuff for the most part, and I feel like he doesn't get what Harriman does, and I know that's a controversial opinion, but I it's one of those things that like there are paintings by George Harriman that you put on the cover, so maybe, but I actually really like this cover, so I don't know why I'm complaining. I think I just wanted to get on that kick, but I do think it's one of those things that it feels like you're really in this guy's world, and there's actually a really good Jeet Heer intro to this one, so I shouldn't poo-poo all the kind of looking at Crazy Ignatz's high art, because it is really good and really well done, and I think if anyone is really excited about the comic art forum, that George Herman stuff is definitely something really worth your time. And it's funny because there's not a lot of comics that I always talk about how there's no need to read comics, but I think that Herman stuff is one of the closest things to that for me, because it is so unique and operates seemingly kind of outside of comics. Like if you went to a comic store now, there's not a lot of stuff you could be like, oh, that's where the legacy of George Herman is now. But it's like a capsule of its own thing.
And Herman, one of the first black cartoonists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
There's a biography of him that I haven't read. I know he had a bunch of, I think he had children or family members that died while he was doing these very joyous comics. So so I'm interested in reading kind of more about his life.
for the little I know, he seems like a super interesting person who made incredible art. So.
Yeah, and I know there's a president that would read Crazy Ignatz every day when it came out. I remember thinking that was cool.
I love that.
Yeah, there's so much fun, and I'm just gonna be repeating myself. What do you got next?
So the rest of my stack is all manga. I've been reading a lot of manga, and it's pretty much thanks to our favorite manga store, which is Manga Hole.
Oh, yeah,
I
Manga
know we
Hole.
talk about them all the time,
Fantastic show.
but they deserve it. They're amazing, such cool people. Can't say that enough. So the first one, my manga, is called Booty Royale.
What's that about?
The subtitle it's Booty Royale. Never go down without a fight, and it is it's almost porn. This still qualifies as ecchi. I don't think it's quite hentai. I think it's ecchi.
Okay.
Which, if you're not familiar with those terms, in Japan, Japanese people, or the Japanese comics market rather, differentiates between what we would call like hardcore pornography, which is hentai, and what we would probably call softcore pornography, which they call ecchi, E-C-C-H-I. and I think this is more ecchi. It does get a bit explicit, which is usually a no-no for ecchi, but I think it toes that line pretty carefully. And it's just really well drawn, really fun, like well thought out plots. Like this has better plot points than most other comics I've read in recent history. Like, very good.
I know just from you and our friend Sarah reading this that multiple people came to me and talked to me about the anteater scene.
Yeah, that's the best part. It's like right in the middle. I can't talk about that further on here.
And it's bundled book 1 and 2 together. So I remember you coming to me and being like, I finally finished Buddha Royale, and being like, oh, finally.
Because it's again, for essentially like a porn comic, it is very dense. It is very dense. You like learn and grow with these characters like earnestly. And there's one character in that totally reminds me of Natalie. I think it might be inspired by her, or Charlotte. It's one of the two. She's not trans, but still. Anyways.
You just name people's first names so that they're less.
Sorry. Right. I'm silly. I live in a different world than the rest of the
We're talking about Natalie Mars and Charlotte Sartre.
Charlotte Sartre. Yes.
The two porn ladies that we know.
Yes, indeed. But so yeah, the initial premise is like this girl who's on the cover. She wants to be what's called a gravure idol in Japan, which is basically like, so like idols are like people who like sing and dance, right? Like K-pop, J-pop was like the original Japanese pop. The idols, and the idols have lots of fans and all this stuff. But that's what regular idols do. Gravure idols do like essentially like ecchi stuff. So like they'll do DVDs where they're like just running on the beach and stuff like that.
Kind of more Playboy.
Yeah, more Playboy. Yeah, that's a good comparison. And so she just wants to be an idol, but then she wants to like make it big singing. And she grew up in Okinawa, which is essentially like growing up in like the sticks in the United States. So she grows up in the sticks, and she grows up with learning karate from her dad, and karate, whatever, comes from Okinawa. Fun fact. But she like takes her small town wits and moves to Tokyo to become a singer, to become an idol. She gets booked with an agency who just turns her into a gravure idol, and then their whole like business model they reveal to be like, oh, actually we say we're going to turn you into an idol, then really it's a gravure idol, then it's a porn star.
Okay.
And she's like, no, I'm innocent, I'm from the sticks.
She's innocent from the sticks.
She's a virgin and she doesn't want to have sex ever. And so the fact that she like has this like pure aesthetic and that she is a karate master gives her agency this idea to put her in a kumite, which is like a karate tournament where she has to fight 100 guys, and if she loses to any of them, then all the remaining guys get to have sex with her.
I was just talking to our lovely housemates about an actual thing that's similar to that, but...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, you're good. And so like that's like the base. That's the initial premise, and that's only like the first maybe quarter of the book.
That's the first page.
Maybe first like 20% of the book. So I was like, how are they gonna make this into a whole book? And she's a whole person, so like you go along for the ride, and it's really cool. By the end of the book, she, depending on your definition, this is a weird thing to say on video, depending on your definition of what it means to be a virgin, she is still a virgin by the end of the book, after many, many close calls. I will say this book is definitely not for the faint of heart. Aside from just like the fun, sexy content, there is a substantial amount of not fun, sexy content, which is really interesting. But yeah, if you have any sort of like trauma around that stuff, maybe I could.
Yeah,
really good art.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were going to say?
No, I think it's a good point to make. The title makes me want to go into a dialogue about Pulp Fiction.
Oh yeah, cheeseburger royale or what's it?
Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
Booty royale with cheese. They don't have the metric system.
That's right.
That one sounds fun. I should actually read that one.
Yeah, and I'm 1,000,000% gonna get the other volumes. There's at least, I looked it up. So this is books 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 have been translated, along with I think, like maybe up through like 6 or something like that.
Okay.
So plenty more to read, but this took me a while to get through. For one reason, because it's really dense, and 2, I kept getting distracted. Anyways, go ahead.
I read these things that were sold essentially as porn comics, but I would say they are not.
Yeah.
So
That's kind of etchy too.
yeah, but yeah. So this is Pongi Bang is a really fascinating cartoonist to me. She's a woman who did a lot of work in the 80s in Japan, and Antarctic Press, or not even Antarctic Press, I think Radio Comics, which is kind of an offshoot of Antarctic Press, brought her work over and was translated like 4 or 5 of her books, and she has this kind of, you know, she's very like, in my head I think of her as almost like a Japanese Paul Pope, where they put photos of her dressed as a rock star in it, but I think she was actually in a band.
Cool.
And I found her Instagram, and she has a bunch of pictures of her. She's like 50 now, and has a bunch of things where she's dressed up as Lum and everything. And I remember kind of dismissing these things when they first came out, because they have this, it reminded me of 90s superhero comics layouts. They're really extravagant, like big pinup pages on a lot of things. And going back and reading them now, like, I think I like them more than you did, but I was really enamored with how much fun they are. Every issue is, like, the first issue is the main character is Timer, and he's like the lead singer of this band. And he basically, there's a character who shows up in every issue, who's like, in the first one he's a time traveling salesman, and he basically like sells the guy a younger version of his own mother that he stole from the past. And so the guy rescues his mother, but ends up sleeping with her and becoming his own father.
Yeah.
In the first issue.
Very Back to the Future.
Yeah, and then the second issue, he's invited over to one of his bandmates' house, and he's in a mansion, and he's like, "How do you live in this place?" And his bandmate's like, "Oh, I rubbed a genie's lamp and ended up becoming a genie for 3 years, and just kind of switching
Becoming
sexes."
a girl.
Yeah, he becomes a pretty lady in the genie's body. It's a weird thing. His body actually dies, and he has to bury himself in her body.
Yeah.
Then he decides that he's going to become a porn star, and so he goes and just becomes famous making porn in 3 years, and then lives off of it. And every issue is kind of like that level of weirdness. They start,
And he does this weird, so the guy who, like, you know, is the genie and the porn star and all this stuff, he does this weird setup where he like brings his band member and friend over and is like entices him by saying, like, if you come over, you can see some dirty magazines, you can watch a dirty film, and then you can have sex with a famous porn star.
Right.
And so he like shows him the magazines, plays the stuff, and then explains the story. And all of the material that he's been showing his friend was him.
Yeah.
In his girl form.
Yeah.
And I thought that, so I think like the interest, like that there are these bizarre like porn scenarios basically that get played out that are really fun, for sure.
Yeah, and then it kind of ends with this implication that they might have sex, but doesn't. Then the next issue just starts. And oftentimes, I read like 6 of these or something. They only translated 10 issues in English. But oftentimes, they will start with the main character, several issues, start with the main character waking up, and there's a strange girl in his bed, and he's like, "Oh, I must have gotten drunk and hooked up with this girl." And then one time it's just like, "There's just an angel in your bed who you've never met before."
Like, what?
Yeah, and they're really fun, and it feels like, and they're set in America, or no, it's Japanese people, but it feels very American. Like one of the guys, the guy who was the porn star was a Brazilian who went to America for 3 years. But I was gonna say, it feels like a Japanese artist trying to do like American rock and roll to comic.
Yeah.
And just having a lot of fun with it, and it's so weird. And so they mentioned before the guy who sells the guy his own mother in the first issue. He shows up in every issue. He's just this little round guy. And like in the last issue, I think he's just like goes into a coffee shop, and that guy's running the coffee shop. And it's just it reminds me a lot of Osamu Tezuka used to do a thing where he, a lot of artists get kind of accused of drawing the same characters over and over. And Tezuka had a whole mythology where he would talk about his characters all being actors, and he would sometimes cast the same actors in different roles. So if a character looked the same it would just be like, oh, that's the same actor.
That's really cool.
And so I like the idea that this one has like this background character that's in there all the time. Masamune Shirow actually has a thing where he has this punk rock couple, a guy and a girl, and he always has like, whenever there's a traffic scene or a car accident or anything in his comics, he'll put them in the scene, and it's just like they're just there in accidents.
I wonder if that's a Japanese thing, because there's a series called Durarara that had the same creators as this other one that I want to say starts with a B. It's some Italian word, and there's this couple that show up in both of them, even though like the stories aren't related.
Okay.
But it threw me for a loop at first. I was like, wait a minute, is this like what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like, I think maybe a creator's way of doing like a shared universe or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we were talking recently about how like professional manga artist life is just very different than what we think of as a comic artist over here, and a lot of it is just the output has to be so much that you're just kind of nose to the grindstone. That I imagine that a lot of the stuff you'd probably get really into your world and just start being like, well, this character's in here now.
That's a cool way to think of it. Yeah.
I imagine they have a lot of very intense internal lives. What else you got?
So next up was this is Phantom of the Night, which you so sweetly got for me. Unfortunately, it was book 9. So I read it, and the art's great. The story had a lot of interesting ideas.
The cover's really cool.
Yeah, the cover's gorgeous. But I didn't really know what's going on. So, and you know, sometimes it works to just jump into a book later on, and you're just like, cool. Maybe we'll just get a random adventure with these people. Unfortunately, this seems like a very narrative-driven one. So I didn't quite connect with it, I guess, as much. But I would, because of the parts that I did like about it, I would be open to finding, if I can find the first book, I would give it a shot. Yeah, so I don't know. It deals with like sort of spirits, like Japanese mythological spirits and manifestations of like animal spirits and stuff like that. And
it's all set around an inn, if I remember right.
yeah, an inn where you can stay, and you have to pay with like your darkest secret, basically, or something.
It's a cool premise.
Yeah, the premise is cool. The world seems interesting. One of the characters, their thing is that they always get drawn back to their supernatural. They're like like the spirit of a deer or something like this, and they always get drawn back to the inn without realizing it. But then they always forget. Once they leave the inn, this one character forgets that they were ever there.
That's a cool idea.
And so yeah, it's this. But the people that work in the inn always remember the person, and has like a love with it. Anyways, so interesting world. I would read more. I just unfortunately didn't understand.
Okay, yeah, it is a weird thing jumping in the middle of something because I usually like it if it's a good story, but sometimes it's easy to get lost.
So then next up was Imaginary. And yeah, it was really sweet and cute. It is basically a slice of life comic. The one sort of differentiating thing from other like slice of life comics is that the characters talk about like imaginary situations, and then you see it played out.
Right.
So the initial example is they're talking about like, you know, the floor is lava basically, but then they like they decide the floor is waves, or they decide the floor is like punji pits or whatever.
Right. It's a guy and a girl walking along, and they're going like along a curb, and the girl's like, remember the game we played when we were kids that if you fall off, she's like, what would it mean if you fall off and get hurt? And he's like, maybe it's water. And she's like, well, that doesn't make sense. And then he's like, maybe it's punji sticks. And so they draw visualizations of it all. And then something I was really impressed by is the second chapter of it is the woman, and she's in a train car, and she's talking to a little kid and imagining a ninja running along the buildings of the train. And that's something I've often, when I was a kid, I would do. I would think about something jumping along, and it was the first time I'd ever seen this stuff put into a comic, and it was kind of using comics in a way to show imagination that I hadn't quite seen before, and the art's beautiful.
Yeah, agreed with all that. A little side thing, I know I told you this when you mentioned the ninja thing, like you doing the ninja thing to me before, was that my version of that when we were driving along long stretches of like highway in the Midwest as a kid was the street lights that are over the highway. They had these, like, at least around Chicago, they had like sort of like a frame, like a support frame, that as long as there were two, as long as there was like a light on either side, it looked like a giant grin. So I was like, it's Joker, it's a Joker, it's Joker, it's Joker. I grew up watching the Jack Nicholson Joker a lot. And Batman the Animated Series and stuff. I was a big fan of Joker and Harley Quinn ever since I was a small creature. Anyways, so this was a fun book. I will totally read more. It's funny, it's not like a book like Booty Royale or something where I'm like, oh my god, this is like amazing, but I'm like, yeah, this was nice. It was like, it wasn't quite like Yashike, like healing manga, but
what
almost.
So we've talked before about healing manga. It's basically the stuff like Walking Man, and what was the cafe one that's really good?
YKK, Yokohama Kaidashi Kiko.
Yeah, the Yokohama Cafe. Those two are basically like nice days of pouring tea for yourself and going for walks to the manga. And so this feels like the characters are dealing with it's a little bit more like romantic drama. Like it is a character who's in love with one of his childhood friends. But it has these very thoughtful like this is how it works inside of people's heads that feels almost Yashike.
Yeah. So it's cool. Honestly, I haven't read a ton of manga in this exact niche, so it was cool to read in that regard, you know? It's definitely not shonen, but nor is it some of the other genres that we read. Like, it's not porn, it's not sci-fi, it's kind of unique in a way.
Yeah, no, it feels very unique. It feels like something that it's almost like Murakami without the magical realism.
That's great comparison. Totally. Yeah. It
feels like what like a 30-year-old manga reader who read novels would read. It's really good.
That's a good description. Imaginary. We liked it. Or I liked it. I guess you didn't finish it.
Yeah, I really liked what I read.
Cool.
Sometimes there's a thing that happens where sometimes the book is so good that I'm like, I need to put this aside for a while. And so what I realized, like, people have been mailing me a bunch of comics, which is really nice, and I appreciate it, but something that I've realized is when somebody mails me a package, sometimes I'll be really excited about it, but it's almost too much, and I have to just be like, I'm going to put this aside, and then when the time is right, I'll read it. And that's really weird for me, where like the idea of when I was a teenager, the idea of me owning a comic that I hadn't read seemed insane, because I liked comics so much I wanted to read everything around me, and as soon as I had something, it was like a chance to read a new thing.
I get that though. I'm reading Albert Camus' The Stranger right now, and
it's where you sit on your hand until it goes numb.
No, I don't have those parts anymore. That though is so dense and like takes so much processing after every time I read it. Like I'll get like a handful of pages, like not many in, and then I'll just have to be like, okay, and now we're gonna break from that and we're gonna process what it means to like think about whether or not murder has a justification and whether or not like absurdism is valid and like all this stuff.
I feel like you think murder does have a justification, and you probably do think absurdism is valid because you're the kid who would spot the Joker everywhere.
Guilty as charged.
Sexy lesbian vampires.
Yes, so this is Vampires that I read. It's Vampires. Oh, I just noticed the subtitle is My Peer Vampires. obviously that was continued.
Yeah,
by
you know your
vampires.
vampires. We just want to get together with some bros and just.
So I don't know if you're like this one. It wasn't. It seemed like meh to me.
Did it require you to forget everything you ever thought you knew about vampires?
I can't even remember what rules of vampirism they went with in this, but
I feel like they're walking around in the daylight.
yeah, I feel like the sun sensitivity thing was not. Maybe it was. I don't know. I don't remember. But I'm pretty sure the vampire goes to school. So, anyways, it was fine. If I was like, I don't know, if I was more submersed in lesbian culture like I once was, then maybe I would be more into it at that time. But
Okay. Does it have an authenticity that feels like it's made within lesbian culture?
within Japanese lesbian culture, yes.
Okay. So they just don't, no one talks about it and they're ashamed all the time. I have no concept of Japanese lesbian culture as being a dick.
It's like very like
very beautiful,
standoffish.
yeah.
What's it?
It's kind of open. And they
Yeah,
just-
the art's really good, for sure.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I won't be getting more of it, but it's fine.
You're gonna remain vampires and not vampirens.
Yeah, I guess. And then another lackluster one, Crossplay Love, Otaku X Punk. And it's funny, I've noticed this in so like, obviously I've been reading a lot of manga, and I've noticed this in several manga recently, where punk means something very different in Japan than it does in America.
What's your impression of what it means?
In Japan, it means it basically means what Americans meant it in like the 50s.
Okay.
Which is like it's a delinquent.
Yeah.
Which is like a whole subculture in Japan. Delinquents, like Yankee is also kind of like grouped in with that.
They dress like Elvis.
Yeah, Yankee just like Elvis, right? So basically, it's the two main characters. One is an otaku, so like a nerd, very studious, and then the other one is a punk, quote
Edgy
unquote.
delinquent.
Yes, a delinquent who's just like, yeah, I'll fight you, like whatever. And the conceit is they're both boys. One of them works at a maid cafe, but dresses as a girl working at the maid cafe.
Is it the nerdy one or the edgy one?
I can't remember.
Oh, so it made a big impact on it.
Yeah, it's not good. But so one of them, and then the other one only feels comfortable when this person is dressing like a girl, and they just dress like a girl, and then they happen to go to this cafe, and then they like have a huge crush on this girl at the cafe, and so they both have crushes on each other, and it's like, oh, will they, won't they, like, then neither one of them knows that they're cross-dressing, and they both go to school together, so they keep running into each other, and they start running into each other, like, well, one's cross-dressing and the other's not, and they don't recognize each other, and
Do they get along when they're out of drag or whatever you'd call it?
when they're in drag, when they're cross-dressing, they get along.
Okay.
When they're not in drag, they're mortal enemies. And
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah. They hate each other.
And then one of them will see the other one dress as a girl and be like,
ooh.
oh, and then they're like, oh my god, that's that person, and they run from them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. So the whole book is just lots of that.
I would call that hijinks.
Yeah. Okay. So it's hijinks. It's nothing. So like, because I desperately want more stories with like, if not straight up trans characters, at least like gender bending characters. Like, so I am drawn like a moth to the flame every time I find a manga, because come on, we all know it's in manga, it's not in fucking Western comics. Excuse me. But every time there's like something like that, I am like, okay, I'm gonna give it a shot.
I feel like this publishing company, like they put out a string for you and dragged you along. They're like, this is what you want, and then it just was the usual garbage of Because you're a pervert, and they
Yeah.
got you.
They got me. I'm a huge pervert, and so they got me. Yeah, it's not.
It's not even ecchi, is it?
No, that's the thing. It's rated like this is rated 13 up. Even Imaginary was rated 16 up. Like, and that has no sex in it. Like, what the heck?
It's got ninjas. You don't want to be teaching our youth about ninja culture that early. This looks bad.
Yeah, it's really bad. So, but you're totally right. Like, God, I'm such a sucker for these kind of books. But occasionally they pay off. Very rarely. Very rarely. But occasionally they pay off, and that is, at least that pays off more often than it does in Western comics.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because we've talked a lot about how when things, not this kind of comic, because I don't think this kind of comic really exists.
No, these people
Western
would be
comics?
burned alive if they were in Western comics. Are you kidding me? No way.
I wonder. I mean, well, there's that super popular like teenage boy romance, Heartstopper. But Heartstopper does. I haven't read it, but you read all of them. Like, it does
Oh, yes,
seem
I
like
read it.
especially like it's that kind of thing where it's my impression of it might be totally inaccurate. It feels like queer stuff that sexuality has been kind of removed from it. Like it's just kind of cute, like Babysitter's Club, the manga.
No, one of the reasons why I like it so much is that they do. I mean, they at least kiss, and maybe they don't get more explicit than that. But it does feel like real romance.
Okay, that's good.
You know, like that's like one of the only examples I can find of that. Because like you were unfortunately having to endure my complaining recently about this. There's, like, I look on the internet for queer and trans comics. I'm like, show me what you got. And just like the vast majority of them are these like sanitized, desexualized comics, when like to be queer or to be trans, like sex is such a part of that. Like, so to strip the sex away is just alien to me, at the very best, and like disingenuous at the least.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is kind of a like, and I imagine some of it is like queer and trans people not kind of having childhoods in the same way that a lot of straight people did, and so they're kind of recreating this like childhood environment within that stuff. But as coming from the other side of that, I'm like, that's weird.
And like, sure, yes, that's true. We didn't have childhoods, but guess what was a part of childhood? Okay, maybe not for everybody, but for a lot of us, having sex was part of childhood. Like, I lost my virginity when I was like 13. So like, for most of the time that I
young.
was, I guess that's pretty young for like most people,
Sure.
whatever. But like, for most of the time that I was a teenager, basically all the time I was a teenager, I was having sex. So like, to read these books where they're just like, we're non-sexual beings, but we're queer. Okay.
That is interesting. Yeah, it made me think of. Oh, my brain is not working. But yeah, so you were tricked. It's a
Yeah,
bad-
I was tricked. I was trapped.
No. I do wonder what the metrics would have to be, because obviously, I mean, there's people that'll just like be mad about anything. But I feel like a story that, I mean, certainly, if it was porn, you could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But doing it as like an ecchi comic, I guess it could exist as a web comic, but it's hard to imagine a publisher that would take that on.
Yep.
Because there is Northwest Press is interesting. I think they still exist.
Yeah,
You might
I just
have
bought a
got-
book from them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they seem like they're
like
kind of
them.
like a queer publisher that
Mm-hmm.
does interesting stuff, and it seems like they're kind of all over the map as far as things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess it's something you've been talking about lately is kind of dipping your toes back into doing more videos about kind of queer history in comics. That's really interesting to me.
Yes, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I want to talk about Howard Cruz, because he did so much
Oh, he's great.
for us.
I wonder if an element of that at all is critiquing how queer comics is in comics as well. Like,
I think so, and I think there's a real loss, and I guess I'll get into it more, but like,
Sure.
there's a real loss, like, because like, when like Howard Cruz helped pioneer like actually like gay comics, you know, like very
literally
explicit
gay comics.
Yes, he was the original editor on the comics, the comic anthology called Gay Comics. which was very explicit. Like a lot of it, like his style was, he did less sexual things, but in a way that was still really cool and really interesting.
Right. Well,
and
Stuck
real.
Rubber Baby's really interesting. His kind of magnum opus, because you get the idea. It feels very semi-autobiographical, and you get the idea that it's like a kind of conservative character. I know that Howard Cruz, from almost the majority of his life, he was married. I mean, the majority of his adult life, he like found his husband and got married, and so he's kind of outside of.
Not legally, but yes.
Well, sure, but he was just kind of very monogamous.
Yeah, he was
as a person, and then his work feels very monogamous.
Yeah,
and that's interesting because sexuality is a part of monogamy, and it's presented in such a like he falls for a guy and then is into him, and it's like a romance.
Yeah, and he does a lot of comics about just like his wonderful, beautiful life with his partner, like really cool, and like it still is, it's like sexual. It's like it's not as like pornographic, but it's still, like you're saying, like sex is still a part of monogamy.
Yeah, so that's a weird thing, and I guess that's kind of that is the weird, almost like Disneyfying of queer sexuality in some ways, where you can't, like, you want to have that stuff, you know, like the queer stuff is a big part of it, but then you're also selling it to kids. That stuff is not part of it, obviously, but there's an element of like teenagers are looking for edgy stuff, or adults that are connecting with stuff. Like the sexuality has a place there, and it's weird to not have it there.
Agreed. Well, okay, now on to the last two books, neither of which are particularly sexual, if I remember correctly. This one has some very light sexual.
Well, that one starts out in a really fun way. It basically starts out with like a guide to, as a teenage boy, it's a group of teenage boys that are going to go into a magazine store and still steal porn.
Yeah.
And it has like, it's very Japanese manga in the sense of like, they have names for the techniques, like, you know, don't do the eagle where your arm comes out. You have to do the camel or whatever and have your arm come down as you grab the magazine. There's diagrams for it.
Yeah. And so I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that's how the book starts. And so it feels like it's going to be this like very lighthearted thing, and it kind of is in a lot of ways, but by the end it's like really dark and heavy and very interesting. So this book that we're talking about, that we haven't actually named it yet, it's Sky Grazer, and it's by Masakazu Ishiguro. Both of these books are by this person, and both of them deal with robotics and the future of like robotics and artificial intelligence and the place of robots in our future society, which is something I'm extremely interested in. And I think that this person, along with the person that did Robo Sapiens, which we talked about before also, which I freaking loved, yes. They all talk about a society in which, like, I think it's probably the most realistic depiction of what robots in society are going to look like. So it's not the Terminator or like Matrix type deal at all. It's this like form of integration. And anyways, so this is Sky Grazer. This one over here, Heavenly Delusion.
Yeah, Sky Grazer is a self-contained thing, and Heavenly Delusion is a series.
Yes.
And I just started that one. I haven't gotten too deep into it.
Okay. Well, I won't give spoilers then. But they're both exceptional. This person, again, Masakazu Ishiguro, is super talented. I will read basically anything this person does now after reading these two books. This one, the Heavenly Delusion that you have in your hands, I will, I'm going to go back to Manga Hole and seek out the next one.
Yeah, I think 3 volumes of this are out already. So the basic premise of this, there's kind of 2 storylines going on at the same time. There's one that's very much like an Akira group of kids all in their pajamas all day inside of like a protected dome with scientists and robots taking care of them. And they have kind of no idea of the outside, and one of them keeps having, I think they're having a dream about someone with the same face as them who's coming to look for them. And the majority of the book is the characters on the cover here. It's the kid who has the same face as the thing, and he's been given this I guess girl in her 20s, I was going to say teenager.
I think 20s, yeah.
To be his guide, and she has this weird laser gun that she can only, they have to charge it with batteries and shoot it, and they're going across this post-apocalyptic world that has these really weird monsters in it. Has a thing that kind of looks like a chicken covered in eyeballs.
Yeah, it was but which is also a human kind of.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
That's weird.
It has a lot of questions in it, and it's very simple and fun, but it also has this cool mystery about it.
Totally.
And it did remind me, it felt very Otomo in some ways, but not in the art style, and kind of the world and the humor in it. So really, really good. I feel like we've been having really good luck with manga right now.
Truly.
We're reading this and Welcome Back Alice
Yeah,
regularly,
so
and what else? There's a couple series. Oh, we're reading the one about the J.K. Haru was a sex worker.
Sex Work in Another World, yeah.
So it's probably the first time in my life that I've ever had multiple manga series that I'm catching up every time new ones come out.
Same, yeah.
So it's good. I'll also mention that we actually ordered comics from Alternate Reality. Like, we started a box there for the first time.
Oh yeah, Alternate Reality.
And I was really excited because Adam Warren's Empowered is coming in. And I ordered Friday Foster, which is like a 70s newspaper comic I'm really excited to read. And Benji Nate's Girl Juice, which I was really excited by.
Yeah. Trying to remember what I ordered. I know I ordered Tomorrow Girl from Antarctic. And a handful of other ones. But yeah, it's just cool to have a box again.
Yeah.
Have a place that we can go get our comics. But yeah, I think that's basically it for right now.
And you're talking about comics with me, Casey Jones.
I mean, thank you.
Good business meeting.
And thank you for watching. What's happening?
Don't fight it, it's bad cake.
Thank you for watching. If you got something out of this video, please click that like button and subscribe. And until next time, see ya.